because it was a great triumph for us, was this bust of the family murderer named John List, who had vanished after killing his entire family and leaving them lined up in their decaying mansion to be found by, I don't even remember who. But eventually he was captured because this amazing forensic sculptor named Frank, can't remember Frank's last name now, but he did an aged image resemblance on a sculpture, on a bust of John List that we showed on the show. I mean, right down to the kinds of spectacles that he thought List would be wearing. And he was captured. And so that became our most amazing life-size prop, if you will, for the impact of the show.
This is where TV intersects with law enforcement and almost gives, because now the new trend is that a murder will go down and then all the internet sleuths come out of the woodwork and 30,000 at-home detectives. And that kind of started with America's Most Wanted a little bit, right?
Not kinda. That started with us. Call us now, 1-800-CRIME-TV. And they did call, and they did lead to the capture of hundreds, thousands, really, of dangerous fugitives. It was an amazing, phenomenal media result, right?
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK-Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech, as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Today I'm talking with the author of a new book that was published in July of this year called Blowback, The Untold Story of the FBI and the Oklahoma City Bombing. So you can kind of guess why she's on the show. But we're going to talk about a whole bunch more than just that. You're a prize-winning investigative journalist. You're a television producer. We were just talking about America's Most Wanted. You were recently on Tucker Carlson's show. You were on Judicial Watch talking about your book. You've got a master's degree in English Lit. You were the managing editor of a newspaper that basically conducted some death row investigation that led to an exoneration of an innocent man. So, like, not just kind of sitting on the sidelines and writing about what you see, but actually making a difference, I guess. So we're going to get into so much more. That you've got some exclusive interviews that you had with David Hammer, Terry Nichols, Peter Langan, who's now Donna Langan, I believe. So I consider you probably one of the world's foremost subject matter experts on Oklahoma City and Timothy McVeigh combined. Would you protest that?
I wouldn't protest that. After 20 years, I should know my stuff.
Okay, I'm glad, because I'm gonna use you to throw a whole bunch of like, I heard this and I think I read this one time,
Great.
and just get your idea on it.
Great.
And before we get into like any official interview, I have one question I always ask everybody. Margaret Roberts, are you a cop?
Paranoid? I'm not.
Okay, because if you are, you have to tell me. You know that, right? That's the law.
And then where would this go if I said yes?
I don't know. I guess I would have to be more careful with my questions. But now I know that I can trust you because you passed the first test. And honestly, before we even talk about
Wait, may I stop you? I'm not going to change my answer, paranoid, but I am going to tell a little anecdote because you just kind of knocked my socks off here, and all the way back to the beginning of this amazing investigation that has been part of my life for 20 years now. In my first interview with Jesse Trinidou, who paranoid, you know who I'm speaking of. He's the primary source for my book. He's an attorney in Salt Lake City who has been fighting for 30 years for justice for his murdered brother. And when I had my first interview on a cold winter day in Salt Lake City, sitting outside Jesse's law office where he could smoke his Toscanello cigar in peace, the first or second, and I had traveled from Los Angeles for this interview, and I was I just was hanging on the opportunity to hear what I already knew was going to be an incredible story. And 2 or 3 sentences in, he took a puff on his Toscanello and turned to me and said, "Margaret, are you working for the government?" And I just I was so shocked. I mean, that was the most surprising question that had ever been posed to me. So whatever my reaction was, probably like when you asked me, I just, I passed muster. That's all I can say. So I hope I passed muster here.
Well, I think I've got an even better question as a follow-up then. Would you even know? What is the chance that you are an unwitting informant for some sort of federal agency?
Well, I'm not bringing good news to the FBI in the book that I have just written or the investigation I've just conducted. So it would have to be very much against interest. So I'm not concerned about that. I don't think that I am an unwitting source. I mean, they've got my book as well as everyone else, and I'm determined to find the truth. And the further along I go down this path, I don't think the truth is good news for the FBI.
Have you gotten any invitations to like a party at Elohim City or anything like that?
Nothing like that. Although I have had a very interesting round of emails. I don't mean to jump too far ahead because our audience may not all know the story as well as we do, but you can come back to this later if you want to. But I am having an interesting email exchange with Kirk Lyons, who represented Andreas Strassmeyer in the months after the bombing, before he slipped out of the country across the Mexican border. So Mr. Lyons is interested in the book, and his reaction was, every thinking American should read this book, and Andy's got some splaining to do.
So we're going to get into the book. There's one thing I want to get into before we even steer that direction, because and correct me if I'm mistaken on any of this, but aside from America's Most Wanted, you were also creator and executive producer of Strange Universe and another one called Mysterious Forces Beyond. Do I have those correct?
I thought that might catch your interest, and I did. When I said I don't have any experience in the occult, or it was beyond me, that was a little bit of a stretch. Yes, I was the executive producer of Mysterious Forces Beyond, which is now way back when, the mid-90s, the mid-1990s. for the audience.
We say
And,
the late 20th century around
there
here.
you go. So I produced that. That was for what was then known as the Learning Channel. And this was a series whose intention was to bring serious scientific scrutiny to people who had had paranormal experiences. And then from that, I produced that up in Canada. And while I was on that, so that I had my head in the paranormal world for 3 or 4 years, really. I was pitching my series. I came back to Los Angeles and I was all fired up about this series I wanted to produce because the X-Files was at the zenith of its popularity at that time. And I was a fan. And I thought, after researching my way through Mysterious Forces Beyond, hey, wouldn't it be cool to produce a reality X-Files? And so that was kind of a handle for my show, Strange Universe, that I produced. It ran for a couple of seasons, again in the mid 1990s. And at the time of the bombing, in fact, I was pitching and selling that show.
And these topics for the mysterious forces, it's like voodoo, hauntings, angels, vampires, near-death experiences, kind of all of the above, right?
Alien abduction, yes, mind control. We got into some conspiracy, but that was sort of a corner of the show. Past life therapy, prayer, healing, all of it. It was an encyclopedia of the experiences of people across the country that were reporting that they had these supernatural happenings in their lives.
And that was one season, 26 episodes. That's what the IMDb credits say. But there's something interesting about the other series that I mentioned. It was Strange Universe. And this one is actually classified on the internet, this is what the internet says, as lost media, because apparently it was a daily show and there was something over 300 episodes. Is any of that correct about Strange Universe?
Well, I'm not sure what lost media means. And I might have crossed a thread here in answering your question because I think you're right about Forces Beyond. Strange Universe ran for a couple of seasons. And so that sounds right.
So lost media is basically a show that people remember watching growing up, but that there's otherwise no digital reproduction of it, no DVDs, no VHS cassettes available for sale,
Really?
And that apparently some people have been trying to hunt down old episodes and they've scrounged together, I don't know, like 15 or 16 online. But the claim is that there's over 300 or close to 300 episodes. And since nobody can find them, and they've been apparent, I mean, I just found a couple forum threads on this like this week, but they've been doing it for a decade, trying to hunt down all 300 episodes. So technically this is classified as lost media. And then I was just reading, like, because it's paranormal conspiracy related, there's some of those threads that are like, they don't want us to know. Like you guys were onto something that was so close to the vein of truth that it had to be wiped, almost like any mention of John Doe 2 in the Oklahoma City, right? Like just everything gets wiped because it's an inconvenient truth.
I'm tempted to strike a match to this. It's a tantalizing story, but I'm not sure that the actual library would live up to this reputation. I mean, some of our bigger stories, and we didn't have a lot of big stories on this show because it was more like we would go out to Arizona where people were seeing strange lights, right? And then one of them would say, not only are we seeing strange lights, but we believe this is a portal to another dimension. And that would take us further and further into the story. We were the show known for a special broadcast called Alien Autopsy. I don't know if you remember
I do
this.
know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was our show. I mean, that was our special. And then there was a cult. I forget their name now. This is really taking me back in time traveling.
90s cult?
94,
Heaven's
5,
Gate?
I think we're talking about.
Could have been
Yes.
Heaven's Gate? Yeah.
Yes,
There you go.
that was our story too, because we were produced in Los Angeles and they were just south of us. So, but as to really deeper, we also, okay, I'm with you here, Paranoid. We also were the show that gained admission to Area 51. And we went, and we also...
Did you personally get to go to Area 51?
I didn't. I was a suit. I was back in headquarters. But our producers did go to Area 51. I do believe did stand-ups from Area 51. And you're reminding me also, and stop, I hope this is not like watching someone's home movies, because I haven't thought about this for a while, but we were the show that planted the flag, and my dear friend Esquire Josham is there now. We were at Burning Man for its first, phenomenal event. And Esquire, a good friend of mine, but was the field producer on that shoot, and he's been there every year since. He's there now. So those were the kinds of things we did. Anyway, I'm not sure we would live up to the "they don't want you to know." And in fact, I myself have had libraries of Strange Universe. I just don't think I kept them. Over time and a long career, you have to say goodbye to things, especially then. Now you could just stream it or whatever, but once upon a time you had to put these tapes on a shelf as if they were books.
Well, just know that there are at least dozens of people that are trying to hunt down all that media. So
I love that. Maybe I could give that a think about who might have some. I'll hit you up if I can, Paranoid, for sure.
Okay. And right before we get into the book, I'm just curious, do you have any bias to or against paranormal or alien or Bigfoot, or are you at heart a skeptic or kind of a believer?
That's a really good question. And I have to give you the background to tell you when I started the first project, which was Mysterious Forces Beyond. I was neither a believer nor a skeptic. I have always been a crime junkie. And the reason I was between jobs and opportunities, and this executive producing this series for the Learning Channel was a huge opportunity for me to get my executive producer credit. So I went to Canada for that reason. I mean, it was interesting, but I did not go in there with a store of knowledge about the paranormal. Now, after 5 years, first on that show, then on Strange Universe, I knew a lot. And I'll tell you, my takeaway from Mysterious Forces Beyond, again, because the network was so insistent, this is to be a serious documentary. I mean, remember, they were then called the Learning Channel, and they wanted to bring their brand to the table. And we were to interview credible scientists on each and every episode, and specifically skeptics. So I definitely had the clash of skeptics versus believers again and again and again. There was another fascinating highlight of Strange Universe. At the time, I can't remember, Professor John Mack at Harvard University was conducting scientific, I guess he was a sociologist, I'm not sure of that, but he was interviewing people who claimed that they had been abducted by aliens. And of course, that was right at the time, again, that the X-Files was at the zenith of its popularity. And John Matthews, Harvard University, right? That's quite an imprimatur on this project studying alien abduction. And he produced a big fat book. I don't know if Harvard published it, but it was a serious book called Abduction. So that was all going on at this time, and really gave me a look back to your question of, do I believe or not believe? I came away believing that something like, there's a lot of hokum in this world of the paranormal, no question. And these skeptics especially the scientists out of prestige universities, who were only too glad to come on and bash the experiences that we were portraying, meaning you would have a heavy-duty academic interview with someone who essentially was going to say, this person who sees ghosts or was abducted by aliens or has a past life, or fill in the blank, this person is either lying, crazy, or mistaken. And those were those are the three categories. And without a doubt, there is a lot, as I said, of hokum in this world. I mean, people who, for one reason or another, are lying, mistaken, or crazy. But there is an area. I came away profoundly impressed, because there were academics who would stand up to this and say, but it happens, it's real, it's rare, but it happens. And I'm in the camp that and I believe that. After hearing thousands of stories and sitting through hundreds of these tapes of these interviews with the academics, the ones particularly, and I don't have names at hand, and they're probably passed on anyway, but the academics that kind of the shrinks and the John Macks, and the ones who stepped aside from their career and said, no, this is too striking, I believe this, I'm going to continue studying this, and then became part of kind of a small select community, if you will. They are the conspiracy theorists of academe, I guess, and I credit them. I believe that there are these experiences that are beyond what we can explain by science.
Okay, and I'm gonna just to save time, I'm gonna assume that some of those similar sentiments maybe we could ascribe to conspiracy theories as well, which is maybe adjacent to paranormal, but it's just like political things that maybe go unexplained, or weird coincidences that there's no great official response to. So open to it. That would be fair.
Yes, open to it.
Okay,
I want to see the evidence. I always want to see the evidence.
And then I'm just curious, do you have a known political bias to yourself?
Well, I think we all, when people ask me about this book, the book is not political. The book is about justice. So, I'd like to say, and I would say, I approach this subject as much as any journalist, and that this would be a whole other podcast, can restrain or confine their own prejudices. But I strive mightily to do that and be, call balls and strikes. That's what I think my job is. Okay,
fair enough. So no, like at least no intent or known political bias that made its way into this book or into your work in general? I'm then just asking.
Yeah, I think yes. No, not wearing any political stripes. And in fact, when people, as they do, ask me about, I come down very critical on the FBI here, and that is, of course, a flashpoint in the current cultural context. And I just would and do and say to you, as news director of America's Most Wanted in the early 1990s, three or 4 years before the Oklahoma City bombing, I proudly worked hand in glove with the FBI on the biggest, highest profile manhunts in America. And I am extremely proud of the work we did, the results we got, the phenomenal, interaction with the public. And so, I was certainly not setting forth after that proud experience to learn dark secrets about the FBI.
Do you think you've burnt all that goodwill away yet?
I hope not. We're in a different now. What goes around comes around, right? And now we're in a period. I think there's a great degree of chaos at the FBI today, but certainly there's soul searching, and certainly this push that we hear so much about for transparency is leading to, I think, admissions that the way business has been conducted, it got politicized. The question is, how far back does that go?
All right, let's start actually getting into the meat of Blowback, which is such a massive and overwhelming topic. It's actually really hard to approach. I would put it at the level of almost JFK in terms of complexity and the number of names and moving pieces and all the different claims. So briefly, let me just explain my understanding of Oklahoma City and why I even care about it at all. This was a building that fell on TV when I think I was in 7th grade, in the middle of like a science class, and we were doing presentations on the properties of water, and everyone had to stop, and they put on this thing. And I was so far detached. I was like, Oklahoma City. I was in South Florida. I've never been to Oklahoma. A building's falling. I'm sure some people were getting hurt, and that was it. And I never really heard much about it for maybe a decade later. And then once I started getting into like the conspiracy world, because I was raised in the 90s, I'm born in the 80s, raised in the 90s. And like you mentioned, the zenith of X-Files. And I usually refer to the mid 80s to the mid 90s as conspiracy by default, or like a cult by default, where almost every commercial or TV show or cartoon might have like a guy in the background with glasses on, like talking into an earpiece. And it wouldn't be explained. And you would just know, like, oh, those are the men in black. Oh, that's the FBI spying on whatever the show is that's going on. Even as a kid, I was kind of like, I learned that the government is spying on you. And that was like a default proposition that didn't come from John Birch Society, right? That just came from consuming regular mainstream media. So as I got further into that, I start hearing and reading books about how it was mind control and that the government was all in on it. And then the one that really started popping up over and over again was the concept of this thing called Patcon. And I heard you on the Tucker Carlson interview where you were started to go into Patcon. You mentioned that you talked to the quote, like top spy of Patcon that also said it was involved in Waco. And so my touch point here is, as soon as I heard about Patcon, I started getting really, really interested. And I just want, can you give me a generalized overview of like the facts of Patcon instead of me coming up with like what I've heard or what I think?
Sure. And in fact, now we're somewhat cutting to really the climax of my investigation. And again,
we'll wind it backwards. We'll start from the beginning too, but yeah, I want to get to the meat.
had mentioned Jesse Trinidu before, and I do want to say again, Paranoid, that it is Jesse Trinidu who has led this investigation, seeking answers about his brother's murder. But it led down, you're quite right, very twisting maze of clues and a path to answers. And the answer came, the big answer, the last piece of the puzzle, what really went on here, came from a fellow Marine of Jesse's in the year 2011. So, almost 20 years into this project for Jesse, a fellow Marine named John Matthews came forward. John Matthews had followed Jesse's investigation, knew he was trying to get answers about his brother, and called Jesse up and said, "You've got all the pieces to the puzzle. You just haven't put them together. I want to come to Salt Lake City and tell you about Patcon. It's bigger and uglier than you can imagine." So that was the beginning of a several-year download from the man, John Matthews, who was the FBI's top spy on top spy. Much is not known about the activities of others, but he was a top FBI operative for 8 years in this program called Patriot Conspiracy, shortened to Patcon, that targeted right-wing extremists, militias, and other groups. To answer your question, Paranoid, so what really was Patcon? Well, that does remain a deep, dark secret, because the FBI does say that Patcon was a limited infiltration operation targeting 3 extremist groups, militias, over a period of 2 years in the early 1990s. When John Matthews came forward to Jesse, he revealed that he had operated as a Patcon informant for 8 years, 1991 to 1998, and he had the plaque hanging on his wall at home in Arizona, the plaque of thanks from the FBI for his years of service. So there's a big discrepancy there as to how big and broad was Patcon. Matthews told Jesse that he personally infiltrated 22 groups for the FBI. And these were extreme groups, dangerous for an undercover federal agent to be operating. His term of service obviously included the Oklahoma City bombing, 1991 to 1998. And he told Jesse, he had been a Vietnam War veteran. He came back, he floated around. He went to volunteered and went to Nicaragua as part of the Iran-Contra operation there, arming the rebels, came back, knocked around some more, and eventually ran into one of his old compatriots there in the Nicaragua operation. And it was that meeting that where he was pitched an alarming idea of helping to rob the Browns Ferry nuclear plant, and on the way out, bomb the control room. So this was very alarming to him, and he went to the FBI and reported this guy had the plan. And so he became the FBI informant. Cut to 1999, when he left the operation what he told Jesse was he became more and more disillusioned as he learned that the mission of Patcon was he had signed on to stop right-wing extremist violence. And what he found out was this operation was really about inciting the very violence that he had signed on to stop. And he became disillusioned and left, and still had a very bitter taste in his mouth about what he had done and what he had seen. And that's and he wanted to go public. When he met with Jesse, he said, I want one thing to come out of this. I want my story told before I die. And he did say that he had been exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, and that he was, compromised in that way. So it was on his, it was on him that he wanted his story told, and he wanted Patcon. He wanted to expose Patcon for what it was.
Would it be a fair comparison to put Patcon as like a right-wing version of COINTELPRO that seemed to target, say, like leftist civil rights movements?
This is the same playbook. This is infiltrate them, incite them to bad behavior, and increase the public's sense of them as a threat. So in that sense, I think that is a fair comparison. And if we cross to the other side of the political spectrum, some of this, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Trevor Aronson, but he has written a great book called The Terror Factory about the FBI targeting Muslims after 9/11. And again, the same playbook. And in their case, a lot of times these were people who, really, they were struggling with a second language, a second culture. And yet, once they got involved with these informants, they became like full-blown terrorists with plans to, blow up God knows what. So, and the short answer to your question, paranoid, is yes.
Okay, so the pattern maybe with the FBI is that they infiltrate a group that they consider to be extremists, and maybe, just to oversimplify, they join a group and the group's playing at about a volume of 4. The FBI's like, let's dial them up to a volume of 11 and see what happens. And this is sort of a repeating pattern, whether it's in left-wing groups, right-wing groups, targeting Muslims. It's really just like they act as this catalyst that injects a whole bunch more resources and I guess possibilities that the groups didn't have prior to FBI involvement.
I think that's fair to say. That has been a pattern.
Okay, so then the reason that I wanted to jump towards Patcon right away, first of all, I think it's the most fascinating part of this, and I'm kind of glad that you're like, that's one of the missions here, is to get more people aware of Patcon and what it means. So I want to kind of state the two extremes. Let me just define the spectrum as I know it, and please help me if we can even expand this further. So on one end of the extreme is the official story, which I'll grossly oversimplify to be a lone wolf, washed out army vet becomes a KKK member, blows up a federal building because he's mad about Waco. That's kind of like the one version. And then the other most extreme conspiracy version, I think, if we ignore aliens and holograms for now, is that an army recruit gets mind controlled by the military, becomes a sheep-dipped informant, and then turns into a patsy for a government operation that was originally intended to blow up a building or make some big impact, to then bolster their movement towards removing the Second Amendment and gun control. That's sort of the other end of that. Do I have the boundaries defined fairly well?
Those are the two extremes, the two extreme theories. Yes.
Okay, so what's the truth between those two? Give me what's the ratio of A to B?
Well, absolutely. The Oklahoma City bombing was not lone wolf terror by Timothy McVeigh. So the other end of the spectrum, if you will, I guess I just would say I think that's close, but I don't think you have to believe. All right, here's what I would kind of, my caveat would be, I don't think you have to believe that anybody intended, on the government side, intended that building to blow up. My investigation suggests this was a counterterrorism operation that intended to stop this plot and wind up with the bad guys in handcuffs. But certainly what you're saying about, well, run the end of your second theory again, paranoid.
This is where I think nuance is important. So in the most extreme version, I would call it a MyHop operation, which is a government made it happen on purpose, right? The other variation of that could be let it happen on purpose, which means that they didn't originally sit down with blueprints and say, all right, here's a plan, guys. We're going to blow up the Murrah building on this day at this time, and here's the pieces. It might just be, hey, let's just give these guys a whole bunch of guns and explosives and contacts and just kick back and see what they create on their own. Let's, like, if you're a scientist making a culture, you're just like, let's just see what happens if we mix this stuff together, what comes out of it. Those are the versions of the government intending for something to happen to just various degrees. And then you've kind of got like the incompetence angle where the government was trying to do something and didn't know what the heck, it turned into a Keystone Cops operation and things just go haywire. Those are sort of the three variations of the government hired Timothy McVeigh and put him undercover to go into Elohim City and to go into Oklahoma, that he was acting at least on behalf of the government in some capacity. That's the more nuanced explanation of the conspiracy theory angle.
Fair to say. And to your question, so what do I believe?
Yeah, if those are the two ends of the spectrum,
yes.
Are we in the middle? Is it more towards one side or the other?
Let's go back to, I think, where I can offer three pieces of evidence that are fresh to many people, because I am the only journalist. As I said, my investigation spans 20 years, so we have to do some shorthanding here, right? But my active original work on this case comes when I went at Jesse Trinidue's request inside maximum security prisons and became the only journalist to interview Terry Nichols, who can shed some light on this question of yours, David Paul Hammer, the prison author who interviewed Timothy McVeigh for 23 months leading up to his investigation and wrote a book about what McVeigh told him, the exact scenario, according to McVeigh, according to Hammer, about how the bomb plot and the bombing really went down. And then thirdly, back to John Matthews and the specifics of what Matthews told Jesse about Patcon. And let's start there because we've already addressed John Matthews. Matthews, who was based during his 9 years as a FBI spy, was based in Arizona, where a big piece of the bomb plot unfolded. Kingman, Arizona is where Timothy McVeigh was living right before the bomb went off. So John Matthews told Jesse that he knew, and this was big news, he knew for a fact that he believed, John Matthews told Jesse he believed Oklahoma City was a Patcon operation. He claimed that he did not work the Oklahoma City Patcon. But he said he knew directly that the FBI created the Aryan Republican Army gang, and we'll get into them, but they were a neo-Nazi terror group that hung out at a remote compound in Oklahoma known as Elohim City, and their leaders were Richard Guthrie and Peter Langan, bank robbers who hit 22 banks around the Midwest in the years leading up to the bombing, and took $250,000, which double that in today's money, none of which was ever recovered by the authorities in those bank robberies. And they were planning an insurrection. They were planning to overthrow the government. And so that was all going on. Matthews said the FBI created that group, that gang, as a front group. And so you can we were able to put two and two together based on what some of these criminals told us. But the fact is that Timothy McVeigh is a known associate to some degree with Elohim City. And according to David Paul Hammer and his interviews with Timothy McVeigh, the Aryan Republican Army were his support group, both in the planning of the bombing and its execution on April 19, 1995. They were there. They were with him. They were his squad on the bombing run. So that's what McVeigh said or as told to Hammer. The interviews with Terry Nichols revealed revealed the most shocking allegation here, and this goes to paranoid, to your question about on the other end of this theory spectrum, was Timothy McVeigh a sheep-dipped operative? Terry Nichols told me in Supermax, me and Jesse, that Timothy McVeigh toward the end of the bomb plot, and when things got very chaotic and stressful, Terry Nichols said Timothy McVeigh let slip that he had operated in the bombing as an FBI asset, that his handler was an FBI agent who had switched up the target of the bombing. This revelation came in early 1995. So it was just weeks and a couple of months before the bombing. But that is when McVeigh, who Nichols said was like very stressed out, using methamphetamine, just kind of lost it and let slip that how angry, how infuriated he was that his handler had switched targets. So back to your question, that's a shocking revelation, right? I mean, I remember back when I first heard this, it was just hard to even process. But if you fast forward now to the kinds of plots and readings of plots that we are seeing in recent years, and I'm referring to the Governor Whitmer kidnap plot, for example, and January 6th, where, in the Whitmer plot, there were as many undercovers as there were participants in the plot. And a lot of the men in the conspiracy believed that one of the FBI agents was actually their leader. So this kind of thing definitely has happened. And I will just add to that. I listened to you kind of reviewing A Noble Lie recently, and which is a very fine documentary film, dwelling in a lot of the same fact base that my book does. I will just mention that there is some very substantial corroboration to this shocking revelation that Nichols made about McVeigh being a federal operative. McVeigh wrote a letter to his sister in which he and the New York Times published this letter some years later. It wasn't clear why. It was just kind of like a little marooned article. But yes, he told her that he had been plucked out of this tryout for special forces and into this elite undercover program where he and, perhaps 10 other soldiers were going to be doing foreign and domestic undercover operations. So, and one more, I'm always interested in the evidence, paranoid. One more fascinating piece of evidence was brought forward by Wendy Painting, who you mentioned in your, in your piece on A Noble Lie. Wendy went down to, she is a splendid researcher. She went down to the University of Texas and found a report from Timothy McVeigh's first attorneys. These were public defenders who were immediately trying to, beat a path out of that case as fast as they could, and they did. But they did have Timothy McVeigh for a couple of days as their client, or a week. And he told them that he was working as an undercover operative. And he further told them that he was shocked at the level of destruction that his bomb had created. That, he said he couldn't believe that whole building went down just from his bomb. So those are very telling pieces of evidence, in my opinion. I will just thread one more and then hope I haven't confused you. But David Paul Hammer and the book he wrote, which was called Secrets Worth Dying For, the first one. I actually edited David Hammer's sequel to that book, and the sequel is called Deadly Secrets. My book, if I may say so, is called Blowback, The Untold Story of the FBI and the Oklahoma City Bombing. But McVeigh, according to Hammer, and I keep saying that because, of course, here we are in the realm of what criminals told the journalist, right? So we have to say, okay, this is what they said, and now how do we verify or validate or judge what they said? But I can tell you that McVeigh admitted to Hammer, according to Hammer, that he had been an undercover operative. He said he reported to a Pentagon office. So his story differed from Nichols in that Nichols said McVeigh reported to the FBI. McVeigh said he reported to somebody in the Pentagon. But as we look at this and these interviews with the prisoners, and there is one more that I conducted, which was stunning, with Peter Langan, the co-leader of the Aryan Republican Army. So those were my three, major, pieces of journalistic work here. And by that time, I was deep into this subject. And what I found most stunning was that what the criminals were telling us about the shape of this plot, Paranoid, and that was your question. So what did really happen? What the criminals were telling us was that this was a sprawling neo-Nazi plot, perhaps 20 people involved in it. And it was loaded with federal operatives. I've just mentioned McVeigh's kind of like the icing on the cake here of the theory, but we over years kept running into people who may or may not have been federal informants themselves. I mean, there are 6 or 7 of them in Blowback. So the fact is that what the criminals were telling us about the shape of this conspiracy stacks a lot better with the evidence in the case than let's return to this flimsy theory of the lone wolf terror operation. It's just, there's no comparison.
And you brought up the Whitmer, which is a good example because I've heard and read lots of similar theories that Elohim City was, like, if you threw a rock in Elohim City, you had a 50-50 shot of hitting some kind of federal agent, whether it be FBI, ATF, CIA in the case of Strauss-Meyer, since technically if he's an international, that would be CIA jurisdiction, all the way to like the Southern Poverty Law Center that they also had plants all spread out throughout Elohim City. So if something happened to Elohim City that resulted in the Murrah building exploding and the destruction we saw, that it would be impossible to completely remove government involvement because they were there for the entire portion of it.
Yes, I think Elohim City was sometimes known as Alphabet City, and definitely, in fact, one of the reported, and I report this in Blowback, one of the stunning moments in 1997. We haven't gotten to her yet, but Blowback features this informant named Carol Howe, who was inside the bomb plot. It's hard for me to tell this even now without like myself being amazed. She was inside the Oklahoma City bombing conspiracy in Elohim City for 6 months in the run-up to the bombing. And she was reporting to her handlers at the ATF that these people are talking about bombing federal buildings. She was going on, and that the Murrah building was on the short list of targets. And she had taken a group, she had made 3 trips driving there to Oklahoma City, apparently to scout. And all this was going on before the bombing. So, but I was about to mention that what happens to her is after the bomb does go off and they bring her back in and debrief her. And that's a very interesting story as well. But the journalist, J.D. Cash, a stunning piece of journalism by him out of Oklahoma, just about the only journalist in America who was not accepting the spoon-fed version of lone wolf terror being handed out by the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. Cash went to Oh, what happened to her is that when she went public to Cash, she did, they turned around and indicted her for her own on terror charges. The jury it took like only a few hours for them to completely reject this, but it was a retaliation move by the Justice Department to charge her and try her. And during this trial, J.D. Cash, sitting in the courtroom reporting, one of the agents, or I think it was I do believe it was an agent, yes, let drop that the patriarch of this community, Dr. Millar, the Reverend Millar, was himself an FBI informant. Now, Reverend Millar immediately turned around, of course, and denied this. And J.D. Cash dutifully produced a next day story saying, Millar denies this. But he also took the opportunity to report that a couple of U.S., I think it was a U.S. attorney or someone from that office, like leaped up at this revelation and, left the courtroom immediately. I mean, it was, a pretty stunning revelation. So Alphabet City loaded with federal operatives and informants. And yes, including, I find this to be a thread that has not been followed far enough, Paranoid, the Southern Poverty Law Center. I mean, they were the source eventually of the FBI knowing that it was Timothy McVeigh trying to reach Andreas Strassmeyer when he called Elohim City 2 days before the bombing. So that,
what are they doing there? What's even their role if you were to go with like the official story? What would SPLC even show up at Elohim for?
Unknown. I mean, all that is known out of these, the paperwork that follows. Well, J.D. Cash, the reporter I'm mentioning, fascinating story. I mean, this guy was a retiree. He had worked in real estate. He divorced and retired early. I tell his story in Blowback. It's an amazing story. But he chased this question that you've asked about what the heck was the SPLC doing in Elohim City. And he got a variety of different reports on. Now this is an adjacent question, like how many times did Timothy McVeigh visit Elohim City? But eventually, Cash tracked down Morris Dees, who is the founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, at a conference of some sort, and asked him point blank, "What were you doing there?" And Dees's answer was, "If I told you that, I'd have to kill you." And that's really from the horse's mouth and all we know. But when you think about it, this is a group that its stock and trade is reporting on the nefarious doings of its natural enemy, the extreme right. And so the fact that to some degree, were they compensated financially by the FBI? That I've never seen any reference to that. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether it was a kind of informational barter. I don't know, and I don't think anyone else does, because the splendid journalists in Jesse's orbit tried to get the answer to that and never did.
Let me talk about some of the things that McVeigh said about being an undercover operative. He mentioned it to his sister Jennifer that you mentioned in some letters. He said that he felt like he was this kind of outlaw working outside of the normal jurisdiction, and that he said that he needed to fund a war with covert means. This is kind of like this coded language. You mentioned that Terry Nichols, he said that when he was doing meth, mentioned something, and then when he's going through all of the stress through the rest of this, that he just straight up says, I was working for the FBI as part of this. He's also been quoted, and this is again like quoting criminals as quoted by journalists. So there was this correspondence where Roger E. Moore, the guy that ends up getting, I'll put it in like air quotes, robbed by McVeigh, there's like this gun dealer. He writes to McVeigh warning him about radiation and virus sprays and electronic mind-altering devices and all that. And then later in the court, Roger E. Moore testifies that McVeigh claimed that the army had implanted a microchip into his buttocks while in the Persian Gulf. Is this just like, is this McVeigh? And I'm asking you to be subjective here, not objective. But in your mind, is this McVeigh feeding into this Roger Moore guy that he's maybe got on the line and just feeding him crazy microchip stories? Or is there a version of McVeigh that believes that he actually had a microchip implanted in him?
That's a tough question to answer. Let me go back a bit,
okay,
and just share that because it was an incredible moment when Jesse and I interviewed Terry Nichols in Supermax. And you have to remember, he was seething about Roger Moore. Well, I don't want to go too far back, but Terry Nichols was furious that his life was over. I mean, he was crushed by this. And Roger Moore walked free. That was something that Terry Nichols was not going to stand for. And in his first public uttering, really, after his state trial, I mean, people who don't know this whole story, he was tried federally, and then he didn't get the death penalty, a jury deadlocked on the death penalty for Terry Nichols, and the state of Oklahoma really, wanted justice, and tried him a second time in Oklahoma, and exactly the same thing happened. He was not convicted. Both juries seemed to accept his lawyer's argument that he was, to some degree, the hapless, weak helper of Timothy McVeigh and had not been able to extract himself from McVeigh. But then, as soon as that trial was over and the death penalty was no longer a threat, because he was under threat of the death penalty all the way until 2004, that's almost 10 years, he immediately turned around and wrote John Ashcroft, the Attorney General at the time, a letter in which he said, Roger Moore was part of this. The federal government was part of this. The American public deserved to know the truth. Come and talk to me. And the letter, there's a lot of attitude in this letter. But when you think about it, that's what was on Terry Nichols' mind. He wanted Roger Moore brought to justice. And as he told Jesse and me, Roger Moore has blood on his hands, and so does the government, so does the federal government, because according to Terry Nichols, Roger Moore, the gun dealer, and in the ammunition business as well, provided explosives called kinestic explosives to Timothy McVeigh that McVeigh used in the bomb. So this means, so Terry Nichols it was a little bit of I won't say bait and switch, but Nichols let it out to Jesse and me as we headed to our interview that he was going to provide information that tied Timothy McVeigh to the Aryan Republican Army, and we were hot on that trail. But that isn't what happened. At the interview, the two revelations that came out, I've shared one already. According to Nichols, McVeigh was a federal operative, but the other one was a voluminous dossier of evidence against Roger Moore and that tying him to the FBI or to the federal government. And so as to your question, a long answer, I know, about did Timothy McVeigh believe that that the government had put a chip in his butt? It seems to me, and again, Wendy Painting will be the best, I would say, believe what Wendy Painting believes on this one. It seems to me that she provided, but I can't summon it up at the moment, that McVeigh's anxiety about all this was sincere. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't have an opinion, but I do believe from Wendy Painting's book that the government has sealed the military records of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. And why, after all this time, would that be necessary?
I've got a couple tangents that are actually really close to that. Last one, I think that's kind of like on the topic to follow up some of the things that we just mentioned. One of those is that you were insinuating that McVeigh couldn't believe the amount of damage that happened from his little old fertilizer U-Haul bomb, right? Like how that even happened, which is another question that retired Air Force General Benton K. Parton, that was like a demolitions expert, and he also, I'll grossly oversimplify and summarize, but it was sort of the plot for that movie Armageddon, where there's a meteor headed towards Earth, and you can't just put a bomb on the edge of the meteor and explode it, because it'll just bounce off the edge. You got to like drill into the inside of it and then explode it, and that's the only way you can really pulverize it and eliminate it. And that one of these ideas was that the ATF, whoever, ATF/FBI, had wired the building up with plastic explosives, as was reported by someone named Jane Graham on the morning, April 14th, 95. She claimed to have seen men kind of like scaling around and connecting things with wires, like connecting putty with wires. And there was a few other examples of this. So that's the other extreme end of this conspiracy, is that McVeigh really was a patsy in a way that, like, even if he drove a U-Haul bomb, and even if he made the fertilizer bomb under the assistance of Terry Nichols and with the supplies from Roger Moore, even if he did all of those things, that was just this superficial reaction. That was the magician's sleight of hand. Like, look over here as the actual explosion comes down. How much validity do you give that aspect of this? That
the
it
misdirect.
Was planted?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I can offer a few more pieces of evidence that may shed light. One of them is Jesse Trinidu. He's got such a vast store of knowledge on a bunch of different topics. And when we were sitting there in Supermax with Terry Nichols, the subject of the bomb came up, and Nichols said Nichols said, McVeigh and I didn't know how to build a bomb on this scale that, of damage that was done. He also told us that the bomb because remember, Terry Nichols was there with McVeigh, or at least according to Nichols, building the bomb. McVeigh told a different story to David Hammer, but Jesse brought up the subject because he had done some interviewing with explosives experts, which gets us toward what General Parton had said, analyzed. And they all said, if this fertilizer gets wet, it's not going to blow up. And Nichols said, indeed, that was a problem, that the fertilizer was all clumped together and couldn't, it was very difficult to work with. And so his opinion was that, I think he used the word, he said afterwards he thought this bomb might turn out to be a dud. And the experts that Jesse had interviewed had the same opinion about, fertilizer that had been sitting around for as long as this fertilizer they used had been. This is just, in a way, it's a small point, but I found it so fascinating in the research for my book, Blowback. Jesse has and I report on this in the book, think about this, Paranoid, you're right, this crime has spun out a web of unanswered questions that rivals the JFK assassination. And Jesse, years later, as part of one of his FOIA lawsuits, has unearthed the only known eyewitness to the bomb going off. And it was a guy who was downtown with his fiance. They were visiting a nearby church. The church wasn't open yet. I suppose it was going to open at 9:00. And they went on an errand, and he heard they were on the other side of the building from where McVeigh had parked the Ryder truck. So he heard something. He thought it was an alarm, and he turned around and he saw essentially a huge fireball go off in the upper stories of the building. This was like, he pinpointed it as being the 6th to the 9th floor, which is completely not what supposedly happened here, right? I mean, the Ryder truck was parked on the other side of the building and blew out the lower 2 floors, including tragically, the daycare center with 15 children under the age of 6. But this explosion was on the other side of the building in the upper floors. So I think, to me, that is credit to there were explosives inside that building. And further, the story that McVeigh told, Hammer, his story includes that component as well, explosives inside the building.
This, I think, is its own 2.5, 3 hour interview just about the explosions, right? And I became familiar with your work and your book through Tanya Yiki, who I've talked to a few different times. She's come on a few different podcasts. Wife of Terrence Yiki at the time when this happened, and his story about the pancaking and of all of the other devastation that he saw as a firsthand witness, and then ultimately what happened to him. Again, it's its own 2 to 3 hour episode just about that one anomaly, and there are so many more of these anomalies. The Richard Snell connection, where Richard Snell had talked about blowing up the Murrah building in 1983, like a decade before any of this happened, that the morning of, I guess he was being put to death, and as he's getting carted away, sees that this had just gone down and kind of like chuckled and laughed about it as if he had some pre-knowledge. So like there's so many different connections to alphabet agencies, to different criminal organizations, to a whole bunch of different people that kind of got swept under the rug that we'll never hear from again. So I'm wondering, to start to conclude this a little bit, who cares about this? And I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean that, and it's either very polarizing in that, like, what do you care? What are you defending, John Birch? What are you defending, KKK racist militias? Like, we're over that now. We don't want militias in this country anymore. That's one mentality of thinking. So why would you call in the question and be sympathetic with this angle? And the other one is just like, this is old news. This is just the trilogy of Ruby Ridge, Waco, Oklahoma City bombing. That's all 80s, 90s stuff. Like, we've moved on to other things now. Like, what is the political capital to gain for anyone to publicly start caring about this again in 2025?
Well, and that's a great question. I think we have a great answer in 2025, because America believes that it owns its own story. The American public have shown, this year in particular, transparency and accountability are practically the zeitgeist right now. I mean, people, who will not take no for the covering up of the whole Jeffrey Epstein story, which has its very interesting links to this story, by the way. Kenneth Trinidu, we haven't talked about him, but you're right, it's another conversation. But Kenneth Trinidu, in my opinion, is the mystery wrapped inside the mystery of the Oklahoma City bombing. And when you do unfold it and see that his supposed jail cell hanging, and then the supposed jail cell hanging of Richard Guthrie, right? He wound up the same way. This leader of the Aryan Republican Army also supposedly hung himself in his jail cell. And then finally, the inmate who had witnessed Kenneth Trinidu's murder by a SWAT team of unknown, agents, he was scheduled to be the star witness at Jesse Trinidu's wrongful death trial for Kenneth Trinidu. And months before he was to take the witness stand, he also wound up hung mysteriously in his jail cell and was declared a suicide. So this story and other aspects of it are reverberating today. We see in the Governor Whitmer case, we see in the January 6th case. Along my way, I was somewhat shocked, as I had never heard this before, that Congress, members of Congress had seriously looked into the FBI infiltration aspect of the Boston Marathon bombings, where there were and are heavy suspicions that the older brother in that case, the one who was killed, was an FBI informant. So I started with Epstein because there's a lot of question about Jeffrey Epstein's connection to the intelligence community, and was he informing for the FBI or the CIA or some other domestic or foreign agency. So when we ask the question, who cares? America, fortunately, it's in the American DNA to want the truth and to believe that we own these stories. I don't want to go on too long here, but there's a piece of this story that's hanging out there still that we haven't talked about yet, which is Jesse Trinidu's Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for the videotapes. Imagine this, Paranoid. There are videotapes of the delivery of the bomb, of McVeigh and his passenger in the bomb truck, exiting the bomb truck, and the bomb exploding. This movie has never been shown to the American public. Why do you think that is? From our long investigation, and this comes from what John Matthews, the FBI agent, told Jesse, that Patcon videotaped everything, that it seems increasingly, and by the way, Matthews was to be the star witness at Jesse's 2014 FOIA trial, and he dropped out at the last minute saying he had been pressured by the FBI not to testify. That led to another long spiral that continues today. The tapes case was fully litigated. It's just awaiting the judge's judgment. But now it has spun into a witness tampering investigation that has gone on for more than a decade. But the point here is, this is a story of one of America's darkest days. And it appears that the FBI has a secret about its own culpability in what happened there, that it has fought tooth and nail and perhaps gone to, ruthless ends to keep secret. So everyone cares. And the degree to which witnesses, whistleblowers, innocent bystanders have been steamrollered in this story has led to a degree of cynicism out there that I think the current push for transparency is such a healthy response. This story, the whole story, belongs to us, the American public, not locked away in secret government vaults. And we all need to care about this, because just as some of those January 6th people who have languished in jail for all these years, we need to be confident that the right people are held accountable and the wrong people are not held accountable. And the only way to be sure of that is to let the truth out there.
You mentioned a little bit about how I'll paraphrase what you were saying to me, that the 2025 zeitgeist, that people are overall more interested in government transparency, is a way to put it very lightly, like very heavy conspiracy speculation and everything's an inside job. That's sort of one of the elements of zeitgeist now when it comes to scrutiny. And with that in mind, and with like the most skeptical version of people that are skeptical of the government, how outrageous would it be to consider that the next evolution of Patcon, based on the conspiratorial concept, like what the government's willing to do to meet its ends, and if the end goal is some sort of a suppression of Second Amendment or gun control or variation of that, how outlandish would it be to consider the next evolution would include like school shootings and not just public federal building bombings?
You mean that someone might have
like a high school Patcon
manufactured a school shooting that law enforcement
for the exact same ends to enact a justification for more law?
I can't. That is so hard for me to fathom. But I will admit to you, Paranoid, that as I said earlier, the first time I heard somebody say Timothy McVeigh, was an operative, I just, my head turned around. I just couldn't imagine it. So these school shootings certainly are the currency, the terror currency of the moment. And again, the question becomes, does the person manufacturing that kind of terror ever really believe that, the gun's going to go off? I mean, isn't the idea to catch them in the act before anybody gets hurt?
I like to end these on a little bit of a light note, so forgive me as we segue into something quite abruptly. I'll explain what's happening in just a second.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
Okay, here are the rules. It's really easy. I'm just going to mention a certain topic that'll be like conspiracy or occult adjacent, and I just want you to rate the veracity from 1 to 10. So if I were to say, for example, Bigfoot, how much do you believe in Bigfoot on a scale from 1 to 10?
0.
What about aliens?
6.
What about angels/demons? I'll group them together.
9.
How about the concept that a human being has stepped foot on the moon in the last 100 years?
10.
How about that the footage that was shown of Apollo 11 landing to everyone on their TV set real time, that was legitimate footage?
10.
What about the idea that the government hired Stanley Kubrick to create a backup version of Apollo 11 in case something went wrong? How
0.
much credit would you give that? 0. What about the concept of like a chupacabra, which is one of the episodes that I believe you did on your earlier shows?
10.
How about 9/11 was an inside job?
Oh boy. 5.
Okay, on the fence, could go either way on that one. That was it. You're off the hot seat. That was a nice quick one. I want to be efficient here. Is there anything? I mean, I'll be the first to say that without the work of Jesse Trentadue, which you mentioned a number of times, a lot of this information wouldn't even be out. So at least let me give my summary of what I believe the Kenneth Trentadue story to be. This deserves its own 4 to 6 hour expose as well. But essentially, my understanding is that it was a case of mistaken identity, that he happened to look the same as potential John Doe, B, that he had the same dragon tattoo on his arm. And then once those two things registered that there was a manhunt for John Doe, and this guy looks like he might be John Doe, that the FBI swoops in and they basically torture him until he admits that he's part of this plan. And since he does admit it, they essentially torture him to death, evidenced by cane markings in the bottom of his feet, that he had the equivalent of 30 bottles of Coca-Cola that he consumed within the last hour. And I guess this has been linked to some torture techniques. They'll feed someone lots of caffeine so that it heightens the pain response. But that essentially he was just a mistaken identity. And if the FBI hadn't gone over, or whatever government agencies involved in securing him and torturing him and killing him, if they hadn't done that and hadn't given Jesse Trentadue a reason to look into any of this, that we wouldn't really have any of this disclosure, or at least a very small amount compared to what we have now. Is that a decent general summary, or am I missing any major points in that?
100%. That is, you nailed it, Paranoid. I might add the one very intriguing connection beyond the physical resemblance to the FBI's wanted poster for John Doe 2 is the fact that Kenneth Trentadue had this background in bank robbery, and that Jesse, eventually learned that the FBI didn't really cancel this manhunt for John Doe 2. They just took it private, and they were looking for the bank robbery connection between Timothy McVeigh and these bank robbers. They didn't know yet who they were, his associates. And so they, as in looking for John Doe 2, they were looking for a bank robber. And so that added to the tragic misidentification of Kenneth Trinidu.
Okay, I feel better that we at least got to include Trinidu in this interview, since he's so important to this entire story. Margaret Roberts, thank you again so much for coming on and letting me ask you not just about Blowback and Timothy McVeigh, but even like your older work into the paranormal and aliens and Bigfoot and stuff. And thank you for giving me some very realistic nightmares that kept me up when I was a kid. I wasn't afraid of Bigfoot or monsters under my bed. I would watch America's Most Wanted, and then I'd be afraid that an arsonist was going to come and burn my house down while I was in it. And you know what's scary is that there's no one that could rationally explain that away. You can't be like, oh, honey, arsonists don't exist, right?
Paranoid. It made you stronger.
It did. Well, I thank you for that. You gave me some mental fortitude that maybe I wouldn't have had without your intervention. So thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure. And find me on X at Blowback Book. There's a very lively discussion going on there. And of course, you can find the book on Amazon, and I hope you will.
I got all the links in the description as normal. And again, highly, highly recommended Blowback Book and everything that you've put together. Maybe I'll have to contact you about hunting down some of this lost media, this 300 episodes of truth that the world can't let us know.
American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all the land and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
Explore the unique with Paranoid American sticker sheets. Unearth tales of cryptids, cults, and mysteries through each sticker. These won't last long. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
All American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all of that and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
What the heck are you waiting for? Discover the extraordinary with Paranoid American sticker sheets. From cryptids in the night to cults out of sight, each sticker is a unique find. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
Paranoid. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper, the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blood smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.